Welcome to BlackUSA.news morning show. I'm your host, William Honolulu Jr. Join us as we explore the news and opinions that impact our community. We break down how the major stories have a very personal, local, and racial impact. No topic is off limits, but even if the conversation gets rough, we're always going to keep it real. Greetings and salutations, all my friends out there in internet land. I am William Honolulu Jr., and I have the privilege and honor of serving as the host of the Black USA News Show. Welcome. We are going to get into it. Today is a big topic. We're going to talk about race. We're going to talk not just about race in general, but we're going to talk about white supremacy and how it came to be. We're going to talk about the creation of the concept of race. We're going to talk about the implications of white supremacy on our electorate, on what we are doing now. And we're going to talk about it honestly. I am hopeful that we will get a lot of comments from everybody out in the audience because white supremacy is a very significant problem in the United States. It really is about what happens next. It is important to look at our history because when we look at our history, we can better reflect what it is that we've been through and how to prepare uh, to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Real talk, because as bad as what our community and the world has suffered under white supremacy, um, no matter, the world has suffered from it. We're going to focus on the United States. Hey, Michael Randolph, kicking it with us from Tampa. I appreciate you, brother. We're going to talk about white supremacy, and we're going to talk about it in the United States. But understand that white supremacy is a mode of social control. So we're going to get into that in a more meaningful way in a little while. Want to just say thank you to you for being here. You have so many other options. You could listen to a lot of other people. There are other stations, but we are grateful that you came and you decided to join us. So, you know what? Let's get into it. Let's get into white supremacy. So first, let's take a look at. Oh, you know what? Let's not do that. I almost forgot my show notes. I need to tell you all what else is going on in the world of Black USA News. Um, as we like to talk all like we talk like we like to talk about breadcoin often. Breadcoin is an organization that takes donations and turns them into food. Not only do people get food, but they get to retain their dignity. So let me tell you how it works. The breadcoin gets your donations, and what they do with the donations is that they create a pool, and the breadcoin that they mint, that those are provided value against what they have in reserve for their donation. So basically, instead of you giving somebody $2.50, because that's how much each bread coin is worth right now, instead of you giving them $2.50, you give $2.50 to bread coin, and they work with their network of people who are in the community, who work with people who are homeless, people who are dealing with food insecurity, people who live in starvation zones. They have an existing network of people who are actually in the community who knows who needs help. They distribute the bread coin through that network, and it gets to the people who are actually in need. Now, here's the part that I find the best of bread coin. Once the person in need gets the bread coin and they go to a restaurant, they pay with bread coin. What that means is that nobody knows about the fact that they may be hungry, or that they may have hunger insecurity, or that they may be homeless. They get to have their need met without having to sacrifice their dignity. I mean, think about it. In a lot of cases, I don't know if you all have ever had to go to, say, a government agency to try to get help. But I've done that, and I've also worked with others and helped them navigate through the process. They get asked all types of questions about their family, about their friends, about their financial situations. and then after they basically expose their entire lives to a bureaucrat sitting at a desk who is in some cases judging them, then they get help. Once you seem poor enough, once you seem homeless enough, once you seem hungry enough, then we'll help you. Breakcoin doesn't require that. And again, I am very, very grateful that Black USA News has partnered with Breakcoin. Speaking of, and this so speaking of, I'm sorry, I got caught up. I got too many thoughts, not enough words. Speaking of making sure that we do what we can to protect the community and making sure that people have the dignity that they deserve, even when they're looking for support, the people who make or shape a lot of these decisions are elected officials. And in Maryland and throughout other places in the nation, we're going to be having an election this year. In Maryland, we have some areas that are strongholds for one party or the other. So the reality is that the primary election in many jurisdictions in Maryland is more important than the general. So if you're in a Republican stronghold, whoever wins the Republican primary is probably going to win the general election. Same thing in Democratic strongholds. So it's really important that we take a look at who is engaged and who is getting elected, what they plan to do, what they promise to do, so that we can make sure that we have people who represent our values, who understand us, and who are in positions to make decisions that will positively impact our community. And so, in an effort to support that, to support those ideals, and to support the information that we need as a community to make these decisions, Black USA News has uh, been interviewing elected officials or candidates, sorry, elected officials and candidates for office. We've been interviewing them since the inception of the network, and we have pulled together all of the interviews, well, not all of them, many of the interviews, and they're available for you guys to take a look at so you can know exactly what people are talking about, what they're planning to do, or what they're promising to do for our community. So make sure that you keep look out for our ongoing election coverage. Let's see what else is going on in the world that we need to know about. Uh, oh yeah, I get to talk. You know, one of the things about doing a morning show is that not well. I ain't saying one of the things about doing a morning show, but one of the things about me is that I really do forget to eat in the morning. I really, really do. I try not to forget, but I do. And what happens is the slide changed or whatever. Something is, oh guys, something is happening with my system. Let me see if I can get something else done. But I was going to tell you. Well, let me tell you while I'm working to resolve the problem about Darker Than Blue. Darker Than Blue Grill. They are located at 413 North Charles Street, and they have amazing food. Not only do they have amazing food, but they have an amazing staff who are really invested in supporting the community and doing those things that are necessary to make sure that we have the resources that we need to eat. I see them often supporting Black businesses and Black community events, and not just Black ones, not just hey, it's Black, but also there we go, supporting events that are reflective of the needs of the community. So if you have an opportunity to go get something to eat, I encourage you to go to Darker Than Blue Grill. All right, what else is there that we need to say? Oh, you know what? It's probably a good idea to do. What is a good idea to do? To tell you a little bit about my company. Let me see if I can find that for you. Whoa, no, I can't seem to find it. That's crazy. Here we go. Here we go. Hi, my name is William Honolulu Jr., and I'm the host of the Black USA News Morning Show and the president of the Grinding Gang Incorporated. The Grinding Gang is an organization that helps small business owners in the nonprofit and for-profit communities figure out how to make sense of all the noise. There's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. We help you develop business plans. We help you figure out what to do with a lot of the information you receive. And we also help you figure out how to become more profitable.
We also host a variety of workshops. You can check out our next workshop on grant writing right here.
All right. So that's all. I've checked the list, and that's all my show notes. So now let's get into it. White supremacy. Um, to set the context of white supremacy, I want to talk. I want to read some excerpts from Frederick Douglass's 1852 speech. What to the slave is the 4th of July? And the reason that I want to share some of the passages from this speech is because it really, I think he does an amazing job of putting into context the reasons that the United States or the colonies revolted against the king. And so let me go ahead and read some of this. He starts off. The simple story is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people was not then born. You were under British. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, and England as the fatherland. This home government, although a considerable distance from your home, did, in the exercise of its parental prerogatives, impose upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper. So Frederick Douglass is going through and saying, like, hey, don't forget that when the country started, this was not the way that it was. The British Crown was the parent of the colonies, and the British Crown, in that role, put rules on the colonies that they thought were right. He continues, but your fathers, who had not adopted the fashionable idea of this day, meaning the time that they're in, the idea of American independence, of the infallibility of government, and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far in their excitement as to pronounce the measure of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought to not be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need to say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. So the colonies were like, well, this sucks. This doesn't make sense. You all are not here. You all don't have what my mama used to say. You all don't have a nickel in that dime, but they're trying to spend the money. And the idea that the colonists has, like, well, you aren't here doing the work. You aren't here making this happen. So why are you burdening us? Why are you why are you in our business? He goes on. He says, oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men, and if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we at this distance in time regarded. The timid and prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Such people lived then, have lived. Such people lived then, had lived before, and will probably ever have a place on this planet. And their course in respect to any great change may be calculated with as much precision as can be the course of the stars. They hate all change, but silver, gold, and copper change. Of this sort of change, they are always strongly in favor. He goes on. There were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. Listen to that line. They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitation against oppression. They showed forbearance, but that they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. In that, he is saying that while the people who or the leaders at the time who decided to rebel against the crown, rebel against England, they were good people. They were people who wanted peace, but rather they could not have peace if they were enduring oppression. And again, the reason that I read this is because I think he does a good job of really setting the context of how America was founded. There were people who weren't here putting in work, making decisions, reaping the benefits, and they were like, no. Basically, let's be clear, what America did was unionize because the English government, they were on some, hey, this is what we do. It's cool. We're in charge. We made the investment in the creation of our community, the creation of our society. We made that investment, and now this is the return on it. And the colonists were like, nah, I appreciate your investment, but at the same time, that does not give you unadulterated rights to us, to our resources. It's not going to happen, Captain. And so they rebelled. They stood up. They used uncivilized tools. And I think it's really important to recognize that as we 247 years later are looking back, it just seems like, duh, why would you want something like that? But think about what that sounds like at the time. That sounds like if Alaska wanted to secede from the United States. Would we really be on board with that? We'll be like, oh no, that's cool, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, no, well, Alaska belongs to the United States in this fight. So that is the context, and the oppression that they felt was so bad that they had to rebel. They had to go to war. Now let's talk about the oppression that they felt. England basically was able to do whatever it wanted. If you look at the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, even if you look at the historical context of the predecessor to the United States Constitution, the Articles of Confederacy, not the Articles of Confederacy, it's one of some of the first drawings from the writings from the Continental Congress. This idea of self-governance was huge. It was that we need to do this because we are being oppressed. And while we don't want to take on the tools of war, we would much rather take on those tools than to be oppressed. And people at the time was like, nah, y'all tripping. This is crazy. We're English people. We are Englishmen. Think about that. They were like, we're Englishmen. Why are you doing that? And a lot of the retelling of the history of America makes it sound like the South was united in this fight against Northern expansionism and the end of slavery. That is not true. There were lots of people throughout the American South, especially in the colonies of that era, who were against slavery, who did not support the war. Some of them, I'm sorry, and those groups were not necessarily always the same group of people. There were some people who were like, no, I don't want this whole slavery thing. I think it's bad. I understand the benefits, but I don't want it, and I'm not down for that. Now, many of them joined the cause. Some of them were spies, the cause of the North. Some of them were spies, and some of them provided other assistance to the North. But the thing was is that they were, they were not publicly coming out against it because they were afraid for their safety. But they also understood that they didn't like slavery, and they wanted to fight back. But there were also people who were much more pragmatic. They were like, oh nah, like going to war? Nah, go ahead, yo. I don't really feel like that whole war thing. That my people might get killed. Nah, I'm good. I'm out. I don't want war. Oh no, we're cool with slavery. Like, oh yeah, I love slavery, but war. That's not good for business. And think about in doing the research for this segment, this show, one of the things that it really reinforced to me was this idea that white supremacy is a function of control. It is a function of not just control, the power in general, but specifically the symbol of power, money and economic money and financial stability. And so what happens is that the when you hear the conversations about why they started the Revolutionary War, or why many of the things in American history have happened, it's because of the money. How even in modern times during the COVID pandemic, 100-year pandemic, literally every 100 years, such a rare and cataclysmic event. We had elected officials. I think it was either the governor or it was the lieutenant governor of Texas, who said that because the initial ideas or the initial research behind COVID was anchored into the fact that people over 65 were dying. He said that the older people should be willing to sacrifice their lives for the economy. That is the important part about the Frederick Douglass piece, as well as the information around kind of the founding of America and how America makes decisions. It tends to be focused around money, and if money is not involved, then it's not that big a deal. Um, we talk about white supremacy and its impact. Well, I'm talking about white supremacy and its impact. Look at some of the statistics around it. I got this from Google Jigsaw. These are violent white supremacy. And this is in the United States. This is what it looks like. If you look at that spike after the 2016 election and white supremacist violence, you see how it just jumps all the way the hell up. Why? Because symbols matter. And in 2016, they got a symbol. If you take a look back further, white supremacist activity was, since 2008, it has fluctuated up and down. And there's a lot of research that suggests the rise in white supremacy had gotten more, had increased, and they were having better or more reasonable access to people to recruit them and to radicalize them. Why? Because the election of Barack Obama. President Obama was seen as part of the larger conspiracy theory to replace white people. That these global cabals, primarily led by Jewish people, are out here trying to make sure that good old white people they get left behind, or that what belongs to them is taken, and mostly about their money. And we find that a lot of when you hear the manifestos or the rationales behind some of these the white supremacists, not necessarily some of the shooters as well, the mass white supremacists who are mass shooters, but the white supremacists who engage in many of the racial incidents, it's because they believe that they are in jeopardy. They truly believe that somebody is out to get them. And if you look at this chart as well, you'll see that white supremacy, violent white supremacy is highest in 2018. But take a look at where everybody else is. Look at every other group on that chart. It's not even remotely comparable. Not even comparable. Let's look. Let's look some more. When you look at the number of deaths, let me take the banner off so you can see it. The number of deaths versus the number of incidents. The number of deaths, if you look at Islamic extremism, because whenever you talk to somebody about white supremacists and the terror that they mark, they always compare it to Islamic extremism. And so if that's the comparison that normally happens, let's go ahead and identify that. And you look at this graphic, the smaller circle is the number of incidents, and I mean the number of deaths, and the outer circle is kind of the range of the inner circle is the range of incidents, and the outer circle is the range of deaths. While you can see that, and this is for 2017, well, you can see in 2017 the number of deaths from Islamic extremism is 185. There are 72 incidents. Conversely, the death from white supremacy violence is 74, and the incidence of 230. And I think one of the things that helps to demonstrate is that we are dealing not just with we should be worried not just about the violence itself, but also the psychological implications of that violence. So let me get this down. So when you believe that your life is in jeopardy on a regular basis because of the people that that you support, or that run the government, then you there's no comfort that you can take. That mentally weighs on you significantly, and it's important that we take those things into consideration because they help us navigate and explain the context of the feelings that we're having now. All right, I want to introduce you all to somebody. Here you go. Professor Erica K. Wilson, at the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill School of Law. Uh, Wade Edwards Distinguished Scholar, Thompson Willis Lambert Distinguished Chair in Public Policy and Director of Clinical Programs. And she is an amazing scholar when it comes to white supremacy. And the word that the phrase that they tell you is going to wreck America: critical race theory. She is one of the experts in those subjects, and what she has been able to do in one of her works, it's called The Legal Foundations of White Supremacy, and it was published in the Paul Journal for Social Science back in 2018. Um, and what she does is she walks through the historical and the historical legal context of white supremacy. And I'm going to go through kind of the paper that she wrote and share some of my thoughts about what she has very brilliantly kind of unearthed and brings to our attention. So she talks about the legal foundation of white supremacy, and she talks about the central thesis of this paper is that American law has historically played a vital role in white supremacy. Unless and until we commit to understanding the history of the law and in constructing white supremacy and the ways in which modern iterations of law continue to perpetuate white supremacy will remain an enduring feature of American society. And so if we don't deal with it, if we don't address where it came from, how it got here, and that it actually exists, we won't be able to do anything about it. And she talks about white supremacy and is really clear on the definition. I greatly appreciate this because a lot of times we get caught into the definition of white supremacy and racism with this idea of some kind of personal individual animus. If I don't hate the person that I am oppressing, then I'm not a racist. If I don't hate women, I can engage in behavior that reduces their rights or oppresses them, but I'm not misogynist. And it is one of those things that, again, as we've talked about on the show before, the focus on individual rights and responsibilities in the American context ensures that Americans will always have to fight for themselves. Sit with that for a little bit. Okay. Um, so the definition that she uses, and she refers to Professor Francis Lee Ansley for this definition of white supremacy. White supremacy is a political, economic, and cultural system in which whites overwhelmingly control power and material resources, and in which white dominance and non-white subordination exist across a broad array of institutions and social settings. And so that takes all of the individual, I don't like I don't like black people, I don't like this, I don't like, takes all of that away. It is about the context. And that's one of the reasons I think they don't want to talk about CRT. Those empower critical race theory. Those in power don't want to talk about critical race theory. Why? Because it means that they have to accept some of the culpability, not just right now, but also in accepting or understanding the culpability. It also means that you have a responsibility to address it. It's kind of like if you find out if and going back to titillating Tuesdays, let's find out. Let me say one day I find out that I have a child I didn't know about, and that I had no idea about the child, and one day I find out I have the child. Um, I have what I do next is important. So all of the things leading up to the child, that's happened. I have no control over that. But what's next is what I do, and that is the definition. That kind of goes to the character and the context of things. If I step in and raise my child or become active in my child's life, that is a decision about my character. If I stay anchored in the fact I should have known, blah blah blah, then that also says something about my character, just not nice. So if I'm focusing in on the my responsibility in what I am now understanding happened, or once I get the knowledge of what happens, now I have a responsibility to do something with it. So at the point that conservatives or the people who are trying to support white supremacy, even if they don't believe that they're supporting it because of its whiteness, yeah. And so let's keep going about what she talks about in the in her paper. She talks about examples of white supremacy can be found in two places, specifically, two really glaring examples. The first is in the racial wealth gap, and the second is in the membership of our legislatures, particularly in Congress. And what she says is that whites have 8 times more than black families in 1983. And then when you fast forward to 2016, so if if black people had $1, white people would have 8 in 1983. In 2016, if black people had $1, white people had 10. That is more than a 20% increase in the racial wealth gap. That can't just, in order for that to happen and for you not to believe, and it's so funny that it just hit me about this. Well, the reality of it just hit me. In order for you to believe that, if you look at all the statistics and you see that there is disproportionate impact on black people or on one group, well, in this case, you use black people. Actually, or if you look at it and you see disproportionate advantage to white people, and you don't believe that it's institutional, literally the only explanation is white, that they are superior. Think about it. If we believe in individual responsibility and everybody has the same options and the laws are on the books and everybody has the same access, and economics and judicial and work for same everybody the same way, and honestly, according to some of the white supremacists, black people have more rights. If that is actually true and you look at the landscape and you see these statistics, there's literally no other conclusion to draw than white people are by definition more superior. So if you think that this is just the way things happen, recognize that that acknowledgement is part of white supremacy. When you also look at the wealth gap between whites and Hispanics, let's see, 11 times in 1983, it was for every $1 that a Hispanic person had, a white person had 11. And then by 2016, for every $1 that Hispanic people had, white people had 8. So in the same period of time, the relative wealth from black to white, uh, the gap between the racial wealth gap between blacks and whites between 1983 and 2016 increased by almost 20%, by more than 20%. During that same time, the racial wealth gap for Hispanic people closed by about 30%. Why? Because is it the institutions? Is it the laws? Is that why the racial wealth gap is so high? We're going to get into that a little bit more. Well, let me spoiler alert. The answer is yes. The answer is yes, but we'll get into why a little bit more. Um, the demographics of the United States Congress back in 2018, 90% of the senators were U.S. senators were white. 90%. So again, either you believe that black people just are not qualified. that they have not done the things that are necessary to be successful, or the deck is stacked against non-white people. So let's look further into the analysis. So let's talk. Where she starts is that in biology, there is no real difference genetically between white people and black people. That there is no fundamental genetic difference. She talks about the history of the United States and its in the formation and what the mix of people was like early on. The reality is that as many of the early Africans brought to the United States came as indentured servants. They came and they lived among everybody else the same way. You know, they were members of the community. Uh, just like the white people were indentured servants, black people were indentured servants, or Africans were indentured servants when they came, because that's how you paid for your trip. You were an indentured servant. You're like, hey, all right, look, I don't got enough money to make it over there, but if you take me over there, I'll work for you for X number of years for this pay, and at the end of that term, I'm done. That actually was part of what happened. However, what they started realizing is there was a labor shortage because they're starting a country. There's not enough people to do all the things that are necessary. And additionally, they started having problems with indentured servants because at a certain point they would just leave. We didn't have the infrastructure to figure out where they went. And back then, remember, IDs and stuff like that weren't even a big deal. So if you left your town and went, 50 miles away, you could start literally a brand new life and nobody had ever heard of you before. And you may never see anybody you've ever known again. And start up with this whole identity. And so what they started finding was like, damn, these people are leaving and we're losing money because I paid for you to come over here and you were supposed to work for me for X amount of time and you didn't. So what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get my money back? And so what they started doing is that they realized that the black indentured servants, the Africans, they couldn't leave. Because and not that they couldn't leave, but you saw them, you knew who they were, you knew they were different, and it became this way to that people stand out. And it went back to economics. You start recognizing that your inventory of labor, you're having high turnover in your labor inventory and high shrinkage, and that's theft, the loss of it without you getting paid. So you started realizing, so you're like, damn, how can I control? You know what? If I only use the black ones, I know when they leave. Literally, that is the conception of race. Before that, it was all nationalism. It was all, who is your country? Are you French, European? Where are your ancestors from? My ancestors can trace their roots back to blah, 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 blah. That was the big deal. Then it became religion. And when they couldn't find another way to make money and control people, it became race. Race did not actually exist. It did not exist until America created it. And it was only created to support the use or the exploitation of labor resources. In as much as we talk about racism, racism is an economic policy, not just social justice. It is an economic policy. In as much as we decide that, we are going to take money from other countries or we're going to invest in them, black people in America are an economic commodity. They are not real people. We are considered property still. So that's how we came to be. Uh, she says to conceptualize race as biological suggests that group differences are deeply embedded in nature and highly determinative of group character. Under this approach, racial identity is both fixed and easily known. That is the biggest thing. You know who is what race, or at least you think you do. And the fact that we make those assumptions, and then once we have those assumptions, all of the things associated with that race come on that person. This is not a natural situation. Let's see. We talked about that part. Oh, then she does this really great transition where she starts breaking down kind of how the laws have supported white supremacy along the way. The first area she talks about is property rights. And she goes back to this kind of idea of the doctrine of discovery. And she says, under the doctrine of discovery, when European Christian visitors arrived on new lands, they automatically gained sovereignty and property rights in the lands if the indigenous inhabitants of that land were non-European and non-Christian. The audacity. The audacity of it all. To go to somebody else's space, and because you're not like me, that means that God has imbued me with the right to take your land. It's also one of the reasons that dealing with Native American history is rough for the United States, because once you know that this is what we've done as a country to Native Americans, then there's something that we need to do. And well, we can talk about Native American history. I would love to have that conversation and actually, you know what, we will, because what happened to the Native Americans, not only is just a crime against humanity, just in general, it is a crime that we are still fucking committing. Recent Supreme Court decisions have suggested that the rights that were issued in treaty or given in treaty to Native Americans for land that their people were born on, they don't even have to follow those. But let's talk about property rights. And so they did this by finding Native Americans did not have title to the land that they possessed. It's a case called Johnson versus McIntosh. Yeah, Mintosh. I'm sorry, Johnson versus Mintosh. And it says that they have no title to the land that they occupied to the arrival of the European visitors. Instead, they only had a form of possession that they could not convey. Basically, they said that they had a life estate, and that's what it's called. Like if somebody says you have this, you can live on this land for the rest of your life. That means that that's yours until you're dead. Now, once you're dead, then it can be distributed or disposed of to whomever. But this is how the Europeans started off in the colonies by saying, by institutionalizing the idea that because we are who we are, simply because we are who we are, we get to run everything. We get to make whatever control, and yeah, that is the underlying doctrine that supports the American experiment. We're white and we're right. So that was property rights. That was some of the property rights that they uncovered, or that they made decisions of, how white supremacy is embedded at the even the if I show up and I want it, it should be mine. That makes a lot more of these outbursts on airplanes and in restaurants and the Karening of white society. That makes it a lot more sense, because the research suggests that this has been the modality for white people to get power. I want it because it's mine. Hell, we're looking at the January 6th hearings, and that's the entire basis on Trump's idea around that the election was stolen. There is no way that I could not have won because I won it too badly. The fact that I won it means that I must have won, and you all have to be cheating for that not to be true. I don't need any facts, because the discovery doctrine and ideals like it mean that I'm okay just because I won it. I'm white, damn it. White. And he's a white man? Oh my God, he should have everything that he wanted. But another way that they controlled white supremacy has controlled the law and used the law to perpetuate itself is through immigration and naturalization law. If we go back to 1790, the first Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1790 limited citizenship to free whites. So again, not even the concept of race hadn't even been a big deal, or something that has occurred to them in a meaningful way yet, except that a social phenomenon that they have observed. But they are starting at this point to start to indoctrinate this idea of Animal Farm. Honestly, that whole, if you all have read Animal Farm, and if you haven't, it's by George Orwell. It's a really great book. And they say, there's this one line, they said, everyone is equal. It's just that some are more equal than others. And that's what it is. life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that all men are born free and all that kind of stuff, except, you know, the people who aren't us. And it's like working with a 5-year-old. White supremacy is like a whole bunch of 5-year-olds. In addition, not only did they have citizenship only belonging to free whites, but then they moved further, and in 1882 had the Chinese Exclusion Act. Um, they made it so that Chinese people could not become American citizens. And in oh wow, and the racial quota restrictions based on nationality remained the law of the land until 1965. It's not even 60 years ago. And so to say that, slavery and white supremacy is the thing that happened before, it's not that big a deal anymore. It is fallacious on its face. It's a lie, and we can't. And by perpetuating the lie that this was something happened a long time ago, some of the people, we're talking about the children of people who are still alive who were voting for that, or supporting it, or what have you. So that's one of the ways that they use the immigration policy to further examples of how they use the immigration policy to further white supremacy. Now, housing policy is the place where not just white supremacy in general, this kind of psychological and spiritual oppression of people, and the legal oppression, but this is where they really took the financial oppression and the financial oppression of Black people, and the making things financially advantageous to whites in housing policy. This is where it picked up tremendously. Um, the Home Ownership Loan Corporation, or HOLC, was created to help homeowners buy their first property. And what it was designed to do, they would get written appraisals for the fitness of the property to determine whether the government should, support loans or what have you. What actually happened in reality is that they created a color coding system to deploy resources. The people in green area represented the most desirable groups that they wanted more to provide mortgage financing to. Blue and yellow, blue was the second, yellow the third, and red was the last and least desirable to receive loan assistance. And while that program wasn't, it was the precursor to a lot of the messed up stuff that we see happening now. Um, that is also where the concept of redlining came from, where they were identifying those places that were desirable. And that's another thing about white supremacy, is that they wrap it in guises around desirability, or again, coming back to this individualized concept of self, or this individualized method of engagement. They come to that place, and say, well, it couldn't be racial because I'm just trying to make sure people who can qualify get it, or people who can keep a loan. But to remove yourself from the larger system and say I'm just focusing in on this part is one of the most effective gaslighting tactics that conservatives use. A greater illustration of it right now is in Roe versus Wade. It is, oh, I'm only focused on keeping the baby alive and making sure that it's born. I don't have to worry about all this other life stuff. I just need to make sure that it's born. Oh, no, 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 no. That's okay. That's okay. I don't have to worry about the baby being hungry. Or I don't have to worry about this side of it where, things like rape and incest. And while those are the high watermarks and salacious and get people's attention, um, it should be a right. And so they're looking at, I only have to worry about the baby. I only have to worry about the baby. And then once the baby's born, that's not my issue. It's disingenuous on its face. And so that's what these government institutions were able to do. They were able to institutionalize this idea of white supremacy simply by saying we're not trying to be supremacists. It's colorblind. And she talks a little bit about that later. The FHA, Hulk actually then started funding the HMA, FHA, the organization, the Federal Housing Administration, which actually helps provide loans for people who are trying to get houses, because the government understands how important and valuable it is. They started denying Black people access to home loans. and which meant that black people were not in a position to actually get mortgages and things like that. So what happened? The temporary housing projects that they had for white people, and white people lived in them for a year or two. So until as they were processing these FHA and other loans, so they can transition into home ownership, they said, "Oh, we'll do the same thing for black people, except that we're only going to get you into the projects." And before, projects were great because they were very specifically designed to be temporary. But then it was like, we're gonna get you in a project. Well, okay, help us with that. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. And then on the FHA side, they're like, we're gonna get you a loan. It's like, well, I've not had the opportunity to do, well, that's not it. That's not our fault. And this ability to kind of bury your head in the sand or not look at the full context has also been one of the legal or the practical, one of the practical tactics that continues to make white supremacy not just viable, but continues to help it thrive. Um, from race to colorblind to post-racial. This and we touched on it a little bit before. To have a colorblind society means that race is not a factor. I'm colorblind, so I don't see race. Well, what that means is that you are not going to take seriously the things that I tell you about my oppression, because race is a real thing, a real social construct that is here that has an implication. It just is. And it is not like other things. Well, let me take that back. It's like a lot of other things, and those things are wrong too. We should not, everybody wants to talk to about Martin Luther King, about people not being judged on the quality of their character, but don't just cherry pick lines, because he was also very committed to financial remediation of financial impositions that were placed on black people. He wanted access not just to the voting box, but also to money, because he recognized that control of economic resources is the basis of power in America. And if we're not focused on getting that power, then our people will always be left behind. So if you are interested in some more stuff about white supremacy and how to combat it, I found this by the New York State Defense Association. They do a really great job of putting together some resources that are appropriate and incredibly helpful for us to utilize. And so I absolutely encourage you to go hit this link up to see what they have to offer and what's capable and what's possible. Um, White supremacy is a real thing. It is a real thing that impacts real people, not just people of color, but also white people as well. We lose opportunities to develop effective social engagements, to take our economy, to take our society even further. And by ignoring these opportunities, by trying to ignore white supremacy and the vitriol that these people are spitting, and not looking back at the history that informs and emboldens the vitriol, emboldens the attacks, emboldens the terrorism. If we don't take a look back and figure out how we got here, we will not be able to remediate, to make sure that we can live in a society that has uh, that supports democratic values, that believes in peace. We need to do something different. We need to say, stop, this is enough. We are not going to do this anymore. That's what we need to do now. We need to call it what it is. White supremacy is a plague on our society. And as you saw, the violence that it perpetrates or perpetuates is phenomenal and is destructive to the very fabric of who we are as a people. It is time for us to do something. Now, while the New York State Defense Association has some resources and some ideas, it's also important for us to start holding our elected officials accountable. We often say that, oh, what does one vote matter? It does. And not just voting, going and talking about voting, talking about the candidates you know, talking about the candidates you support, talking about the issues that you want to see moved, really engaging people and making sure that they understand where you are on these issues, so that if nothing else, the dialogue can happen. Too often we sit in fear of judgment of what happens in our society, and we don't speak up. We can continue to do that, but the stakes keep getting higher. Using Trump as an example, because he is a phenomenal example of all things horrible. He got off on the Mueller probe. He got off on the first impeachment. He got off on the second impeachment, and he has not stopped. Why? Because there's still enough people supporting him, and the people who do not have not taken the steps necessary to hold him accountable. We have got. Is it hard? Absolutely. Is doing what we need to do to fight white supremacy going to be hard? Absolutely. Is it going to take more from us than we should have to give? It absolutely will. But what is happening is by us hoping if we just do the right thing and we focus on our individualism and blah, 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 that we can make things happen. That is not it. That is not where we are at all. We need to do more. We need to be aggressive. As Frederick Douglass said about the founders of the United States, the colonists, at the point that they realized that they were being oppressed and that they couldn't take it anymore, they fought back. I'm not suggesting, as the Republicans are in Texas, that if America doesn't change, that we cede. I'm not suggesting that. Neither as I am suggesting, as the Republican National Committee suggests, that violent engagement is legitimate political discourse. But what I am saying is that we need to step up and not just take the blows and not just try to be better and hope that we win. No, they are cheating, which means that we need to change the rules to prevent that. So I call on leaders of the white community to help us address the impact of white supremacy on the rest of the planet. We ask you to step up and hold the people that represent you, hold your elected officials, your appointed officials, your family members. We ask you to stand in and hold them to account, because until we start dealing with the truth, until we start dealing with what things actually are, it's not going to get any better. Democracy in America right now exists on a razor's edge. That means a strong blow, one way or the other, may knock us into a place that we cannot come back from. The precipice of fascism, of tyranny, of the same things that the founders of the United States said, except guess what else is happening here? They're killing us. They're taking, actually, it's the same thing. Black, brown people, poor people in the United States, we are oppressed the same way that England was oppressed in the United States. It's no different. They are coming into our homes. They are violating our persons. Every rule that was set up by the founders to protect us against English overreach, they are violating now. And I think that it's time for us to do something about it. What? You tell me. I'm almost down for whatever. We've had a good show. I've enjoyed talking to you, my people. And we will be black tomorrow.